Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Lgct Grand Prix analysis after the sixth stage of the season in Hamburg. It was a rainy weekend in the Derby Park where Frank Rothenberger was building the courses for the weekend. And last year in the Derby Park, Rothenberger had troubles with the time allowed, with only Harry Smulders going clear inside the time limit. Also this year, somewhat, Frank Rothenberger was wrestling with the clock. We'll tell you all about that in just a minute's time. But we'll also analyze the most difficult line of the weekend, and that was probably the triple combination down the hill with most faults on the second and third part, but for various reasons. And it was a passionate jump-off between Christian Ahlmann and André Thieme, but also between Christian Ahlmann and, of course, Michael Pender. How that played out, there's lots to say, there's lots to talk about, and there's lots to analyze. Let's get cracking. In the 2021 Longines Global Champions Tour Grand Prix of Hamburg, Frank Rothenberger struggled with the time allowed. Only one rider jumped clear inside the time allowed, and that was the eventual winner. That was Harry Smulders and Une de Lontin. And with that tight time allowed, there were others that jumped clear but didn't finish inside the time allowed. For example, Michael G. Duffy and Yves Jobs, both of them finishing on the podium on their career high in an Lgct Grand Prix. On time faults, onto the podium, a situation that Rothenberger absolutely wanted to avoid this year. So, how would the time allowed be this year in 2022? It was set at 88 seconds. And the first man to go was André Thieme. Thieme, on his championship mare, DSP Chacarilla, Thieme jumped straight away a clear, but finished 200th inside the time allowed. And that was tight. 200th inside the time allowed, but Thieme, left and right, rode an extra stride, went a little bit wider, so it was difficult to judge. Then came Mario Stevens, and Stevens jumped clear with 3 time faults. In between there was Derin Demirsoy, but he didn't jump clear, but also finished outside the time allowed. Stevens came through on a clear, but with 3 time faults. And at that point, it was allowed for Rothenberger to lengthen the time allowed. And he did that. Not to 89, not to 90, but to 91 seconds. So plus 3 seconds on the time allowed. How did that move, that change, impact the final outcome of the first round of the Grand Prix? Well, actually, we had 8 clears inside the time allowed. But if you look at those 8 clears, only 2 were slower than the original time allowed. So you can ask yourself the question whether or not that move was necessary, yes or no. If those 3 seconds were necessary, yes or no, from Frank Rothenberger. But in any case, he wanted to avoid that same situation. It would not have happened, but it's always easier to say that with hindsight. Now, let's have a look at the course that Frank Rothenberger had built, and let's zoom in on the line that really stood out. We've been talking in the build-up to Hamburg about the slow on the big ring, the Derbyplatz in Kleinfloatbeck in Hamburg, and there was one line specifically that stood out with that slope. Have a look. It's actually the line quite late in the Grand Prix course in the first round, the line from this vertical to this triple combination, and this was the final fence, so basically the last 3 fences in the first round of the Grand Prix. The line that we want to discuss is this line, and then very specifically the distances inside this triple combination. When we walked that line, it walked like a fluent 7 or a holding 8 very much on the outside. But for some reason, in the end, it rode differently than it walked. It rode actually as a very normal 8 from center to center. And that had a lot to do with the vertical, and the vertical that was really tall, the vertical where a lot of riders really slowed down for the upright and really took good care of that vertical. And by slowing down, of course, the 7 weren't as fluent, and the 8 were nice and easy through the center of that line from the Longines Global Champions Tour upright down to the triple combination. We've reconstructed the triple combination very basically, but this is actually what it should or could look like. Here you see that there is a clear downward slope in this line. And what you need to know, it starts with every oxer being 1.60 meters wide. First oxer at 153, second oxer the size at 158, again 160 wide in here. And this was 1.58 meter, the vertical to jump out. Now that is still very straightforward. In here, in this line from oxer to oxer, Frank Rothenberger had drawn 10.80 meters. Down here, Rothenberger only had 7 meters 90 from the oxer to the vertical. Now, jumping oxer to vertical on the downhill slope at the end of the course. Horses are already a little bit tired. It's of course the second round of jumping on that day for those that didn't make the horse change. And then with the downhill slope, that made it extra difficult. For the first oxer and the second one, obviously you need a lot of scope. But this here, this was the biggest problem, the short distance to the vertical. You couldn't come flying in for that vertical. If you came in with too much pace, you would be real deep, real down to the base of the vertical, and you would take the top rail off. So that was what was on many riders' minds in coming into this triple combination. Basically, the good approach was a slow, deep stride with still with enough punch over the back rail. But here was crucial. This was crucial. What happened in here decided the rest of the triple combination. There weren't many faults on the first part of the triple, but this was the point where horses needed to rock back on their hocks, sit back on their hind leg, and make sure that they got enough room here to the oxer, but also with a right balance to jump upward and over the oxer. And that's what many horses struggle with. Again, down the slope, at the end of the course, horses a little bit tired, a little bit more weight on the forehand, and then not really getting the width, taking the back rail down, or the horses that came in with too much pace, they landed too deep into the combination and found themselves close to the vertical. Let's have a look at a few combinations, for example.